And welcome back to this episode of Uncover the Human. This week, we're mixing it up a little bit. We actually have no guests with us. Last week and actually the last 2 weeks, we got to talk to Lori a little bit and unpack some of her values, get to the bottom of what it means to go find your own values and start applying that to life. So we thought we'd cover quickly both Christina and I's personal values. We went through the same exercise between each other and how we kind of whittled that down to what is valuable to us, how that forms the company values we have with Siamo, and then go through some of that connecting tissue that we kind of got into with Sam, got into with Lori, and we'll go through much more explicitly here. So how's it going, Christina? Feeling good?
Yes, it's Friday.
Yeah.
So I have to wake up a little bit. Yes, doing good. Starting with we're talking about values, and I had to figure out what my values were. Or remind myself. Yeah. Yes.
This is a good exercise we do occasionally when we figured we'd do this because we're kind of coming to the end of our first season here with Uncover the Human. We have been releasing since October last year, and I believe this one will be coming out at the end of September. So we'll be on a brief break between seasons for the beginning of October at least. And we thought we'd kind of revisit, reorient, and we'll come back with even more fun stuff in October. So we're doing some reflection, self-reflection, as well as some other reflection on the podcast year coming up next week. So that'll be fun. Yeah. But today we're going back to our core value for our core topic for most of September at this point, which is values. So let's dig into that a little bit. So Christina, I don't know if you want to start off. We could talk a little bit about some of our personal journey to values here and some of the ways we got there.
Yeah, let's definitely do that. So values is the core topic for September. As in the first word or first two words of the title of each podcast. We're gonna, but I would say it's probably the core topic of our whole first season, and I can't imagine that it will really change much. We're always going to come back to values. My personal values journey, the first time I've ever done a values exercise was actually in the IPEC training. Actually, no, I lied. The first time I've ever done a value exercise was when I started coaching with Nina Cashman, who we've had on the podcast. And this was probably 2017 when we did that. And she was helping me transition from a more team leader role to I guess, higher leadership role. And a lot of that was part of me giving away the control over how things are done and understanding that it's not an easy transition, because when you go from especially individual contributor, which I was a lot of times, you're stepping into a completely new role. And in that new role, you have to give up what you used to do, which got you promoted in most times. And so it's a little bit of a loss of identity. As part of that coaching period, I did my first values exercise with her to figure out what are my core values. And that has helped me a ton to kind of come back to how do I make decisions? How do I figure out when I feel disturbance in the force, for lack of better explanation, where I feel like things are not quite aligned, where I'm not at peace. What do I notice when I do feel at peace and authentic? A lot of what we talked with Lori about. And values is really where it came down to. And don't ask me what my values were in 2017, because I'm sure I can find the exercise in the Word document, but I do not remember what I decided my top values were. I don't imagine they're very different from my current ones.
That's a really good point you bring up, because it's values are a great way to help you make larger decisions. And it's also a particularly good thing to investigate during periods of transition. And it makes sense that you talked about that with Nina, because Nina, when we had her on, was talking about the thing that she loves to coach in specifically, which is coaching through transitions. And so it's a great time to kind of reevaluate, and you get this chance to make a different decision when you're making a change. And why not, boil that down a little bit, make this based on what you personally want to do. So, and another good point that these are going to change a little bit over time. And what is important then is a little bit different than what's important now. And there might be some running through lines, but it's always good to kind of reevaluate these, because your life situation is going to change. What you value will change. And the example we've always given, and it's an easy one to connect to, is maybe family wasn't an important part, and then suddenly you have kids, and now it's going to be a pretty important part going forward. So an easy one to note that there's lots of different things that can change in our lives that would make a specific time a little bit more towards some values versus others. So that's why we're revisiting again, even if we've done this once or twice.
Yes. And even as a company, we use our values to make decisions, to figure out if we are aligned with the clients and prospective clients that we may be working with, how our timeline, roadmap, anything that we are facing, we use our values to actually talk to that and live through that. And so we have also revisited our values at least twice, I guess, this year. So it's probably a quarterly thing that it's being done. And I heard that actually Chipotle does that with their leaders. So they ask, part of their quarterly review with leaders is to ask the leaders if they have lived their company values, how, and give specific examples. And if they haven't, and figure out where the barriers are.
It's a really good way of making those decisions, because it's too easy otherwise to default to things like, which option is going to either make some more money right now, or it leads to a lot more short-term thinking if you don't apply this back to something that is more, core to you and core to the company. And I think it's great that Chipotle is doing that, because it kind of makes sense to both align, not only just to kind of remember and reconnect to what the overall mission is, but it also guides you on, hey, what do I want to be doing specifically? And that's what we found to be one of the most powerful portions of this. Is it's really a good time to self-reflect, think about things that are important to you, but even better, put that into action and decide how you want that to show up in your life. And so that's why we went through the exercise we went through with Lori, where we kind of talk about times where you feel particularly energized and pull some themes from there. It's really helpful to do that with somebody you can be a little bit more open with and be able to talk through these things with. So that's what we did. And we went through and boiled our core values down. It once again feels very much in alignment with everything that we've been working with Siamo. So it's always nice to see that coming through. And then it gives us a chance to kind of hone that, redirect it, and move forward a little bit more directed than before.
Yeah. And what I liked about what we did for our company values is that we went personal first. Since we are the company, we are the founders, and we make all the decisions at this point. But it's not a separation. And so understanding what our personal values are at this point in life, after a couple of years, after whatever has happened with the pandemic and everything else, and to make sure that do they still align with the company's values? Because that's another conflict that's going to get harder and harder if it's not realized up front.
And that's what we got to talk about with both Soraya's journey, which is a few episodes back here, but totally worth the visit, because she talks about going out on her own and rediscovering how to find clients by basing most of her business more on her values and how she wanted to interact with people. And then we also got to talk about that with Sam Moore, who went through a very similar journey of he's a solopreneur, and he was like, well, here's my values. How does this apply to my company? So yeah, we're doing this from a duopreneur point of view this time.
Which is important, because as life changes, we have to make sure that what's important to us is still important to the other people in the company, especially co-founders. And is it then aligned? So it's kind of a three-way alignment. Like, is there a Venn diagram here between my values, your values, and the company's values? And is there enough overlap that it makes sense to do things as we do and to continue?
Yeah. And it's a really great way of just aligning your decisions, because you're going to make them based on something more core. And I know we kind of reiterated that one already, but it really does come down to like, well, how do we want to move forward? Christina and I love to come up with ideas for like products and services just all the time, but it's a lot about whittling that down and deciding which ones are the right ones to pursue. And it's a lot easier when you have a framework of like this that really does seem like it fits in the middle of the Venn diagram. This is the middle of our three Venn diagram, or whatever. That can be a really potent way to align exactly what you want to do with overall company goals and business goals.
Indeed. Yep. All right. So where did you start your values journey?
So I have done it some pieces here and there. The ones that I had tried originally, and I think I got it from maybe Brene Brown's workbook. She had one where it was like a list of like 90 values, and you try and pick out ones that feel most important, and you sort of go through them, figure out what that kind of means to you, and try and settle that down to like a prioritized list of a few of them. That's another important part that we always discuss. Like values can also kind of come in priority. You might feel in conflict when you have 3 of your 4 main values in alignment, because the fourth one is actually just really important, and it's currently not available in your situation. But the thing that was always frustrating, I think, with exercises like that was trying to decide out of a list of 90 values what applies. I think you have to have done a lot of listening to yourself ahead of time, and I hadn't done nearly as much of that work. And so doing something more like where we did with Lori, where you just kind of talk about, hey, here's something that just, there was a time I was really excited. I couldn't even necessarily explain it. Maybe it seems one-off or something very niche or something that only me in that role at that time would be excited about. But when you talk about those things, and especially when you talk about them at a few different stages in life, it becomes a lot easier to suddenly see the through lines, or to have somebody else look at you and say, well, yeah, here's these three things that I'm hearing you say that seem to be coming up. And so that's one thing I really like about, you get to kind of collaborate on it. You talk it out loud. It's like rubber ducking your own psyche. So it's kind of fun. So that one I've been connected with a lot more. I like that type of values exercise.
Yeah, and I've done the full on list as well. It's hard if you haven't done the work up front to talk through the exciting moment, the frustrating moments, coming up with the themes, because you get drawn into what are the values that I'm supposed to have. Mm-hmm. Family being a big one. If you have a family, then you're like, well, I have to put family in my top values, because otherwise I'm a bad parent or a bad spouse. And so it's, and family doesn't need to be in your top values just because you have a family. And it doesn't mean that your family doesn't matter mm-hmm. by not putting it in a top value. It just means that you relate to your family and you treat your family based on your other top values, which could be collaboration, trust, learning.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really important part, I think, bring up too. It's easy to find overlap between like life domains, like your work life, and how that relates with your life and how that relates with your family. Those are more domains of life, whereas values are like exactly what you're saying. It's the more of the how you're interacting in these different domains. And so you might, obviously your kids might be important to you, but how you're interacting with them is more personal to you. And that's more how you're interacting with the world. And that's where values come in handy. And so that one that's a great example too. And the other reason that it's hard, I think, for people to start with the list of values is you get sucked up into what you think the definition is. Mm-hmm. And values are going to mean a little bit just like words in general. They all have a slightly different contextual meaning to us based on our own experiences. And when it comes to our values, those are so personal to how we think and what we think about, that it's worth remembering, hey, this is my definition of what integrity means to me. This means not only being honest, but also aligning my words with my actions, things like that. That one might be a little bit different than someone else's interpretation of integrity. And so that's the other reason I find the giant lists a little bit challenging, because it's too easy to see the words and think of whatever a more standard or dictionary definition of that word is, rather than applying it to what your life might be. Like freedom is a great value that a lot of people have, especially in like the entrepreneur space. But what does that really mean? Does that mean you're free to do what you want with your time? Is it freedom the way that we put in all kinds of generally meaningless political advertisements about where we stand for freedom? Like, what does that mean? What does these are easy to get lost in if you just have the word and you haven't thought about the definition for yourself.
Very true. Very good points. So I think what we're going to do next is share what our last figured out personal values are, which is only a couple of weeks old. So we're pretty current.
If we did this again tomorrow, though, it's totally different.
Yeah.
By the time this is released, it's totally different.
Yes.
The one that I guess we can just go through the list if you'd like. I can share if you want to start off. I can dive right in. The one that comes up to me over and over and over again every time I've done a values exercise is curiosity. And that's what boils down most. And again, this one comes down to like my personal definition of curiosity. It's something that I really enjoy learning a lot about new topics. I love the exploration of connections of weird and seemingly unrelated topics, or stuff that you just happen to know from other domains. It's really fun to tie those in. And so getting to learn new things, getting to expand and explore is always incredibly important. And that's one of the reasons I think I love doing this podcast, getting to talk to people, getting to meet all these interesting people with interesting ways of thinking about life. Curiosity just comes through time and time again. It's just love the learning, love something new, and love to be able to apply that to all the other random experiences I've tried to accumulate over the years. I can see this would play out in lots of my personal experiences. When I was in college, I took a class from at least a 101 class from every single department that I could get a hold of. So that was always super fun. Did like linguistics and sociology and anthropology and visual arts, and I think I did a music composition class, and it was really fun just to kind of explore all those things. Even if my eventual major only had one label on it, I got to do a lot of different stuff, and it was great. So that would be the one that always comes back for me. Seems to be curiosity.
Well, I love how it ties to what you did in school, so it's definitely a deep seated value. But how, from external perspective, what does it mean to work with you, knowing that one of your values is curiosity? And the first thing that comes to mind to me is, let's make sure that he's not in a position of having to do the same thing over and over and over and over, and not learn different things, and not learn the connections to different departments, or how processes works, or how something that happens in HR may influence ops or anything like that. But because it's against the curiosity. And so it's kind of a note to self: make sure that there's variation, make sure that there's ability to open up and discover new things.
That's very true. And that's a great point about going through values exercises like these too. Especially nice to do it with another person or another coworker, because you get this view into how people interact and what you can do to help support them, as well as just communicate a lot better. It's a lot easier to understand where people are coming from when you know what's important to them.
Yeah, definitely is. And it becomes, less of a soul-sucking job.
Yeah.
If we can actually work based on our values.
Yeah, we always talk about how there's not really a separation between your work self and your life self, and this is one of the things that if you can tie these up and be able to work a little bit more authentically in your space, it's way easier, and it's way less soul sucking on both fronts. You're not taking the aggression home or the frustration home, and you're not taking frustration back to work either way. Yes,
indeed. Well, one of my first ones, the one that comes back to. Well, they all come back all the time, but let's say collaboration. That's how I'm calling it this month. Next month, it will have a different name. It could be partnership, it could be connections, it changes. But the concept of it's always the same. So if somebody has a good word for that, please send it to me, because I'm still struggling on the actual words to use. But one of my deep core values, and I notice this a lot when it's missing, and also when it's present, but more when it's missing and I'm actually suffering, is the constant connection with other people, is working with others, collaborating, lifting each other up, finding solutions together, communicating. It's truly the opposite of competition. One of my favorite concepts of all time is the concept of Ubuntu, which boiled down is, I am what I am because we are. I have found, and I have learned, that without others, without being able to be with others, communicate, learn from others, I really suffer. Like, I suffer as a human. Like I started finding it hard to think through things. I find it hard to make decisions. I find it hard to learn. I go to bed miserable. Really, I need the constant connection, and not shallow connection, but just deeper connections, and just knowing that it's there. And there's work that's being done together in life and work and family.
That's a great point. And Ubuntu might actually be exactly the word you're looking for. Maybe that is the value. And for those wondering,
exactly.
that is, for any Linux developers out there, that is also the name of the common distribution of Linux. It's Ubuntu. And it is, I believe it comes from, I think I looked this up at some point, it was an African word. And it refers to that community of how everybody is interacting together, and everybody is kind of one. It's the spirit of everybody, which is, it makes sense that would be a Linux distribution too, for people who are into the operating system distributions. But when it comes to like working with you, that becomes a very good guidepost for me, because it reminds me like, hey, let's be connected. Let's make sure and this is something that just I'm traditionally not great at, whereas any of my friends and family will tell you, I don't respond well to texts and emails. It just doesn't happen often. So this is something I work on especially, and I know this is important with Christina, and so this is something I want to do do well with, and make sure I'm honoring that. And we do get to collaborate a lot on lots of things, and it's always enjoyable to do so. And so I try and be especially forward about this is a connection we have. It's I don't want to leave any messages unread or unanswered, and try to keep those at the forefront of the mind to keep the overall community or creativity and collaboration running.
Yeah. If I had to think about like disconnection is my kryptonite, and connection is my sun. I truly like even something as simple as good morning. It gives me enough energy to get through most of the day. So
and that's actually a really great point too. That values, when you get to be in alignment, it does provide that energy, and that's one of the reasons it's so important, and why it's so easy to, once you start to feel the alignment and to feel things that are aligned and not aligned, it's so much easier to start making decisions based on that, because you start to get that connection with the internalized feeling of like, oh right, I just feel much more energetic post feeling this kind of thing. Like you're saying, like even a good morning, like that's a good connection. That's a good reminder of like, hey, we're here. We've joked about the IM messages that we have from years and years ago. We were joke about feeling like we didn't exist, or almost wishing we didn't sometimes when there was a lot too much going on. There was we would go feel like it was invisible, but that you can do something as small as like a good morning that can immediately foil that and create the energy that otherwise would be more of a negative energy cycle. And for a good review on that one, you can check out our episode on the Eli with Lauren Grau. She talks about the energy leadership. So that one's a great one to think about, like when you're moving more positively, when you're feeling a little bit more closed down. And values are a great way of accessing that much wider feeling, that much broader, more creative, open approach.
They definitely are. So what's another one for you, Alex?
So one thing that also comes up a lot, but this is my new label for it this month, and we'll see what the label is come next month. But I'm calling it innovation. I think is the way I title it. When we met, I was basically working on a team of one. I mean, I was working part of the technical side of the company, but I was working on just one project alone. I've done that with a couple other companies since then. I love just doing something that's kind of in the middle, kind of unique. And the most fun part is just getting to create something completely new. And that was what's been super fun about doing Siamo. We've done like 20 things that have been entirely new and a little bit different. Like we kind of went towards consulting, but bridged that with more of coaching. And we've also done more of like, podcasting in combination with software product developing. And it's really fun to kind of lead the charge on something that's new, unique, and different. And getting to create something from scratch is it's a joy. It, I guess, relates back to curiosity as well. Yeah. It's something that is new.
Very much relates back to curiosity. Yeah. And I think it's your working genius from the table group showed that up as well. So it's not just our interpretation of that or your interpretation of that. It actually comes up in other assessments, productivity assessments.
That one's a great one in case anybody's looking for both another podcast and another assessment to take, the Working Genius by Pat Lencioni's table group. Very fun one. It's not as much like a personality assessment. It's more about like how you work and what types of work well for you. And they break general patterns of like getting a full project done into about 6 stages, and talk about which ones you best relate to and which ones you can use help with. Because everybody is energized generally by some portion of this. If you can get a good team that is well matched in all of these 6 disciplines, you can get a good movement going. So that's something that is also important when considering values. Is what are your potential blind spots? What are things that you need help with? Both values and the Working Genius one can kind of illuminate those. Anyway, that's total side note. I'm now off on somebody else's podcast, but
we're not getting paid to sponsor them, but we really like it.
Yes. That's, I suppose, an important message. Yes, we do not have a sponsorship with it.
No. Maybe one day, Pat.
You recommend.
Listen to this. Yes. We're in full support of your Working Genius.
So what's another one for you, Christina?
One that it relates to collaboration. So I'll just go in order of how I've written them. It's inclusion. So as part of collaborating and be able to collaborate and connecting, inclusion has to be there. So feeling included, making sure everybody else feels welcome as their unique selves. They have the freedom to be who they are, to do what they are doing best based on their strengths and values and passions. So it's really about how do we make sure that there's diversity and there is equity and there is belonging, and there's inclusion. So inclusion it's a must step in there, because again, like, how can you truly collaborate with somebody if they're not feeling included? How can you make sure that collaboration comes up with the outcomes, the best possible outcomes, if there is no diversity of perspectives? And, there may be token diversity in the room, but if whoever is the token diverse people don't speak up and don't feel included, then you're not getting everything that you could possibly be getting. And it's part of that invisibility. I can be present, but if I'm not included, then it's almost like gaslighting visibility. It's like I'm physically there, but but I'm being gaslit by being treated as if I were not. That's when I always sometimes feel like, yeah, exactly. It's like, wait, am I just watching this? Am I here? Sometimes I joke and it's like, oh, I put my invisibility cloak on this morning. That's what's happening in this meeting.
That was the subject of many of our original chats on existence. Yes. It's very funny. Yes. We would just sometimes be like, I'm not totally sure why I was in that meeting.
yeah. Or I was, but I wasn't allowed to speak, or I was allowed to speak, but nobody was listening. It was like you're speaking and it's like you're not really there. Like a conversation is happening on the side. And I'm like, I had actually here. Hello.
This happened totally. I think it was inadvertent, but it happened on a Teams call. I got invited to there was a meeting going on and somebody wanted some input, and so I got this invite, and so I joined the meeting. But I don't know if there's some specific way you can invite people, but I couldn't get the audio to connect. I wasn't allowed to type into the chat. It literally said the chat is disconnected for Alex. I was like, well, okay, why? And so I'm in this room and I can see I can see whoever's sharing their screen. They've opened some work that I was working on, and they seem to be asking questions about it, but I can't hear anything. They can't hear me. I can't type. So I'm getting these questions coming up on the side, well, so what are we going to do about this? And I'm like, I don't know if my computer's dying. I don't know if I've been invited weirdly. So I'm living in this weird liminal space between existence and none in a Teams room. I'm trying to shout at my computer yes, that's fine, please continue, and I can't get anything across. I can't get any of it. It's a weird one, and I think inclusion, that was just a random thing that happened very recently, but you bring up a good point about invisibility, because that inclusion one is incredibly important. You can access so much potential when people are allowed to speak, but it's also incredibly hard to notice if you're not being diligent when it's not happening. I mean, there's just people seem quiet, and then the meeting's adjourned, and the points of view that were expressed are remembered, but you'd have no idea if there were other ones. There were just people there who didn't say much, and now they leave again. So it's I think both a very common one to feel a little bit on the out if you aren't included, but it's also so important, and so much potential is unlocked when you can be much more diligent about seeing people do those things.
Yeah. And we talked about it with Duncan, actually, on how inclusion has to be a proactive act as leaders or anybody. So it's not just, hey, we asked if anybody had questions, nobody raised their hands, and only one person did, so we're done. We've created inclusion. You're in the meeting, you're in the room, you're included. And I'm like, no, inclusion is actually proactive. Inclusion is looking around, like you said, and being like, okay, who hasn't spoken? Why aren't they speaking? Why are they so quiet? They were invited to the meeting, so clearly it's important for them to learn this information. They may or may not have questions. Their questions may even be, I don't know if I have any questions yet, but there's, that it has to be proactive. It has to be, call on people. Say you're going to call on people. So it's not the, oh my God, deer in the headlights. So start the meeting by setting the expectations of hey, it's important that you are here. We want to hear your opinion. So as we move along, we're going to ask what your opinion is. If you have any questions, if you need more time to process it, because there are processors that need to go back and think through it, then we'll have this and this and this ways for you to come back and provide your opinion. But there has to be an actual effort to create inclusion. It's not just a passive, well, they're here. Not my problem if they're not speaking.
Yeah. That's a really great point, because it does become your problem eventually anyway, even if you'd like to not take responsibility for it, or you think like, well, they should be the ones to speak up. That sounds like an okay thought at the time, right up until you've now missed some point of view that is either leading the whole project off on the wrong foot, or you're just slowly shutting somebody out who you do need, and they just are going to slowly feel a little bit more left out, burnt out, higher turnover rate. And it's easy to see where over time that builds up. And if you see somebody who particularly doesn't contribute, it's very unlikely they don't have something to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is likely they don't feel comfortable saying it.
Yeah. It's a huge red flag for the space is not psychologically safe.
Yes.
It's like, it's just glaring, flashing Las Vegas sign. Type of thing.
There's a big psychologically unsafe arrow
yes.
in neon lights. Yes.
Yes. Do not speak, or there's going to be consequences.
And you can see how that ties to your original, you kind of what we'll call it the Ubuntu value, the being connected with others. There's like that inclusion is there. It is really inherent in both of those. That you like the connection with people and you like the inclusion, and that absolutely makes sense. That's one that actually ties really well into. I think I can pretty much merge the last two that I had into one overarching one, which is the same as the theme of this podcast. It's authenticity. And half of that, we talked about this in our very first episode, even half of it is the comfort to be yourself and feel like it's you're allowed to express and fully be, kind of your true self. The other half of that is creating the space for others, because I think it's fascinating to see that in others. I want to have people to have that ability, because I want that ability too. I want this to be a much more open space where there is the ability to connect with other people, to feel like there is that actual you see a person for who they are. It's like seeing having a real conversation versus small talk, having something, just general, well, what do you do versus, well, what do you love about, this thing that you did, or what's an exciting thing that happened to you recently, something that's more in depth and just more exciting to connect to and listen to. And that, I guess, goes back to curiosity too. It's just fun to see those parts of people, and that requires that level of psychological safety and inclusion. And so you can start to see then actually in that one where that value ties into actions later. I mean, I have the value of authenticity. This means that in a workplace, I need this to be a space where I do those things like proactive inclusion, because that connects to the value of everybody gets to be a little bit more authentic. And now you can already see like some of the action items that start to come out of this, even if it's in different life domains.
Yeah, it's great, because I think Lori was the one that mentioned this, how values are not linear and they're not siloed. So they're not, pieces, they're just orbiting space without any connection, but they're more like a spider web. And so they are all connected. So it's not too surprising to find that our own core values speak to each other's and need each other. So one really relates to the other, and it's part of the other at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, and actually, I have a great story. I went on a wonderful hike yesterday with our friend Uma, and we went up to Indian's Peak Wilderness, which is a beautiful, beautiful space right in west of Boulder, Colorado, that I didn't even know existed. And we ended up starting up the hike with two other women that was there in the parking lot, and we're trying to figure out how to read a map and figure out where the trailhead actually was. And after a couple of false starts, we kind of all looked at each other and like, maybe we should hike together and figure this out. If we get lost, it's 4 of us, not 2 of us. It was deep in the woods, which is why it wasn't that clear. But, right. And we ended up hiking with them for 2 hours, I think, to get to the lake. And we never asked each other, at least for myself and the daughter, the younger one, it was a daughter and mom combination. And even for the mom, we never asked each other, what do you do? We talked about where we lived, our passions, favorite sports, just things that were about us as humans. It was never like, the first or second or third or even 15th question is, let me classify you, but figure out what your job is. It was never part of the conversation.
That's 100% exactly what I'm talking about. That kind of connection to that level of depth is much more exciting. And there is something really fun about that connection. And it's a connection not just in like when you're at work and you're thrown into a project on a team you maybe haven't worked with much or something, and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to do this part, you're going to do this part, and we'll meet back here in a week and see if it was done. Like that's
Oh
very
yeah.
much just surface level at best. So you're not even like talking to the person, you're just talking to the task at that point. And when you get to have that more deep conversation, not only is it just more interesting, but way easier to be a collaborative team, to be more open, to have that creativity, to find all those opinions. This is where it becomes important to have these things accessed in the workplace and available to yourself, so you know when to speak up and what to speak up about.
Yeah, it's so important. Yes, and the description of what you provided, it never works. But it may work on the surface short term, but it never really works. There's a lot of long-term redo and rethink, and something went wrong and we missed a piece. And yeah, all those missing pieces and redo, it's because of the beginning where there was no time taken and invested in actually getting to know each other as people and collaborate instead of just taking a task list and splitting it up in 4 and then see you in a week.
Years and years ago, I was put on this. I wasn't put on a project. I was just contracting. I knew somebody who needed a little bit of help. They'd been redoing their website, and they had just their like backend developer either got sick or had to leave or something, and wasn't able to finish this. So there was like a little bit of work to finish. There was some integration with like Salesforce that wasn't connecting or something. And so I'd done plenty of tech work. And I was like, well, I'd be happy to help. It sounds like it's only a few hours. Like I can jump in and do this. And so I was in a much more discrete area of the task. There was a whole web team that had done a lot more of the front end portion of it. And I could have totally gone that way. And it was kind of started that way. We're like, okay, well, I'll finish this up and I'll tell you where the code is so you can go deploy this. And that was basically could have been the only interaction I had with that front end guy who had done it. But we started talking a little bit, and I was curious just, about how he was deploying, and I hadn't seen any of these new front end tools at that point. I'd been buried in the back end for a few years before it. And anyway, long story short, we talk a lot. I was just, we asked a lot of questions, and years later, I'm still in touch with him. I've visited him. I was in New York at the time, and he was out in California, and we've seen him since then. And we've kind of gotten to see him. He got married and has a kid now, and all kinds of like life has changed dramatically. And we could have had just a one-off conversation, and I would have truly never known another thing about his life. And turns out we had a whole bunch of other interests. We were both in computers, but had done acting before. And there was just all these weird connections to all kinds of little things that truly would never have happened otherwise. And it was a much easier project for it, because it turns out the deployment ended up being broken for some other reason, but we both jumped in on it to collaborate and finish it. And it was a success that definitely might not have been. And it could have easily just been like, well, that's not my problem, not my job.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly what I was thinking, is especially since the deployment didn't work out for other reasons, how likely would you have been to jump in and collaborate on figuring it out if it had been that one sentence conversation of like, here's your tasks, call me if you need me, or please don't, because I'll ghost you when you do.
That's like Ubuntu is the foundation that is so much more important than the task. Yes. Like that connection for the exact reason, like who are you going to help out with, and vice versa. The person who's been incredibly rude to you or has really dismissed you, or somebody who, yelled at you for something you don't feel like was fair or whatever. It's much harder to even imagine a situation in which you're like, oh, let me get out of bed right now and help you. Because I realized that something has gone wrong. Like, what I mean? Like something goes sideways in the project. It's like, wow, that sucks to be you. What am I going to do for it?
Let me
so
get my
much easier to hit that
while
white space.
Let me get my popcorn and my wine while I watch that fire go off.
Yeah, that's when you're at the front of the Titanic. You're like, yep, there's definitely an iceberg here, but I kind of want to see what they're going to do about it.
Yeah, exactly. From the lifeboat. I just get on. Very sad, because it happens too often. And it takes so little. That's what it is. It really doesn't take that much to create that collaboration, so that there is, you're there for the good of the collaboration, for the good of the community. The community is always going to be much higher and much greater and can do much bigger things when people are working together, as opposed to in their tiny little swim lanes and silos. And
And it always, I think it's people tend to like write it off as if it just sounds nice and how could that possibly work? But that's exactly why it works. You have you just have that connection. You want to help the person, and because now it's not about the work. We put all these metrics to it about like working 40 hours a week or having whatever title, and that means I don't have to do X job or I only do this portion of it. But that's not really, if you think about it, the goal of any company anyway. I mean, I guess if your entire company was based on trying to create a rigid hierarchy of people, then you might be moving towards that, I suppose. But like you probably want to do something, right? You have a service, you have a product, you're trying to deliver something, you're trying to finish projects and make sure that there is some larger goal met. What are the chances that if you've written job descriptions and everybody is only going to do their job description, that there are no gaps? Do you think your team has fit so well together like puzzle pieces that you have covered every gap and that there's no overlap and that no one and that it would ever work that way or anybody would enjoy it? Like that we all did our tiny little piece. We talked to each other as minimally as possible. And, now this thing is out there. Did it work? Did anybody check whether it works? Did anybody check whether that's the right solution? Has anybody told you like, oh, this connects to this other thing you might not know about? Those are the pieces that you miss out on that end up sinking the ship later, even if they seem small in the moment. And that's why it's so important to do all these things to make those connections. It's way too easy for people to think like they have to write it off because they just have to get a task done. But you did a great job of explaining exactly why that falls on its face so often. Who am I getting tasks done for? Do I agree with what they have said? Do I like what they've said? So if not, it's a lot harder to be like, yeah, I'll definitely help you when the site breaks at 4 a.m.
Yeah. First one in line. So actually that connects pretty well to my next one, which is trust. Mm-hmm. So trust, and I've again debated with what to call this. There's truth telling, upholding the truth. It really comes down to truth. So maybe truth is the real word, but trust for me, comes from inclusion and collaboration can exist without trust. And it really means there is also no trust without telling the truth. And I realize it sounds very absolute, but it's true. So I'm going to make another absolute statement. Telling the truth really comes down to like have the hard conversations with yourself and with others. So it's not just truth with others and truth back, but it's also within ourselves, which we are masters at lying to ourselves about situations and things and interpreting and all of that. Those are all not upholding truth, which means it's harder to trust ourselves when we have an instinctive calling, when something instinctive comes up where it says like, oh, I'm feeling like there's something off here, or my instinct is telling me this. If you can't tell yourself the truth, can you trust your instinct? Is that even possible? If you don't know where your values are, can you trust your instinct? So it's all really connected. And I'm a big believer of telling the truth, no matter how hard it is, because it preserves the relationship. It preserves the collaboration. Whatever it is that happened can be worked out together if there's truth behind it. If there isn't, then that trust erodes, because not only erodes for the moment, it erodes for all the past and all the future. And I tell this to my kids. My kids are pretty honest. I would say 100. Nobody's 100% honest, so I don't expect that from them either. And I'm not 100% honest either. But they're pretty honest, and they're younger kids, and so they don't even have the preconditioning, or like, maybe I shouldn't say this out loud. So they'll come home and be like, oh yeah, Grandpa gave me 4 donuts today for lunch in celebration. And in the meantime, I'm having a small heart attack about that. But that's who they are. And then every once in a while, they'll feel like, oh, you just asked me if I brushed my teeth, and I know I didn't. But if I tell you that I did, maybe we can just move on into the next thing. And so I've told my younger one, which tends to really hate brushing his teeth. So that's where he'll say yes with this no written all over his face. And I keep telling him, I'm like, you're never going to get in trouble for telling me the truth. I'm never going to get upset. I'm never, I guarantee you, and you can call me out if I do. You can tell me, Mommy, you promised you wouldn't get upset if I told you the truth. But you will get in trouble, and I will get upset if you lie. because if you do, I can't trust you about anything. And then what do? Do I follow you? Do I put a camera on you? Like, how am I supposed to know when something is actually happening that I should know about if I can't trust you to tell me the truth? So that's my summation of trust.
I think that's a really great way of describing it. And I love the connection to self-truth as well, because that one ends up coming up so often. It's so easy to get into those stories of like just, something that you stop. You're not really being honest with yourself in a number of ways. Like always we're telling some more fabricated, more rationalized story than we would like to believe. We'd like to believe it's the right story, it's the true story, but it's always some variation that tends to be a little bit self-serving, often a little bit off, or it's trying to protect against something else. I had a moment a few months back where I had been regretting some choice I made like 8 years ago at a career path. And I was trying to decide between two things. And I was like, man, maybe I really should have done the other thing. And I spent about 15 minutes starting to get into like the usual like mental cycle. If you get into like a trap like that, where you're like, okay, well, that probably destroyed everything, right after that. There's no way I can recover from this. This is, I can't believe I would have done this, but how could I have chosen these things? And what are the things that are still okay that I've done? Maybe there's some kind of something to be salvaged here. And you go through this like catastrophizing and rationalizing. And I stopped after like 20 minutes because I was already like tired at the end of a week of a lot of different things going on. And I was like, well, let's just think about this for a second. Maybe I should have done that. Maybe I should have done something else, but I can't change that now. And maybe it's okay just to sit with the fact that like, hey, yeah, that might just kind of suck. And maybe something else should have happened. And once I stopped fighting, stopped rationalizing, I felt a little bit sad for a little bit. And then 5 minutes later, I stopped thinking about it entirely. I had already started to plan, okay, well, here's what I want to do different in the future. And I didn't lose what would have probably traditionally been, like maybe a couple hours, maybe a couple of days, maybe a month or a year of basically rationalizing and working against that decision. So I was just willing to sit and say, you know what, honestly, I probably do have some regret over that. And that's okay. I'll just have to like have that regret be. And it was suddenly so much easier just to let it happen. But it's not easy to get to that space, both in interpersonal communication as well as with yourself, because we don't want to lose face, even with ourselves. We don't want to feel uncomfortable, and our brain is trying to protect us all the time. So truth and trust are important and difficult to come by for that reason.
Indeed. Well, and how much could you trust yourself to make the right decisions if you started believing those stories that weren't true? Like it wasn't true that whatever you were telling yourself, that now your whole life is destroyed because of the decision you made 80 years ago, and you're never going to get to do whatever you want to do, and your whole trajectory is doomed. That's not the truth, capital T truth. And yet if you believed it, if you went around like truly believing that, you could never trust the decision you made in the future, which is where the truth and trust are completely tied together.
And it becomes like a capital T truth if you let yourself be stopped long enough. And then you go back and tell yourself I was right the whole time, even if you might not have been right. And you're only right now because you told yourself at the time a lie. Yeah. Truth is a great one. And it's actually very similar to that. We were talking about like, who you're going to help. Like, you can help the people you can trust. And trust comes, once you have that initial broken piece of trust. Yeah, I mean, if the person comes back later and is like, look, I was having a really bad day, I'm sorry, I yelled or lashed out or said that or whatever, and it's a lot easier to repair that, especially if there's already a basis of a relationship. But if it isn't addressed, or it just kind of goes on, or how do you have that trust again? And it's not really possible. And then it's much harder to have an open collaboration at that point, because you're always going to be a little bit on guard. And if you're on guard, you're spending time being on guard, you're spending energy being on guard that could otherwise be solving the problem, be helping each other, be figuring out what really does need to happen, or finding something that maybe both parties hadn't even thought of. And now there's something completely new, something that really changes the game. But we'll never know, because we were too busy being on guard and making sure the other person had maybe told the truth this time or not.
Yeah. One of the best quotes I've read recently on trust is that it's the most expensive thing we have. It takes years to build and 1 second to lose.
Yeah.
And it does. It's true.
Yeah. I think Mark Twain says it, trust runs away on a horse but comes crawling back.
Yeah.
It'll disappear in a second, and it takes a long time to come rebuild.
Mm-hmm. All right. Are we on our last one? We have
yeah, right? I kind of wrapped the other one that I had was connecting with different people and connecting with other people, but that kind of comes to authenticity for me because it's that's where you allow people to connect. And it also falls right back to curiosity because it's really just fun to connect with people and hear their stories, hear what they have to say about life and how they approach it.
Excellent. My last one is learning, which is similar to curiosity and everything else. And for me, it's the constant learning, sharing of information, learning by doing, learning from others, learning from myself. So doing the work to figure out like what went right, what went wrong, what can I change, how do I want to show up? So just lifelong learning. That's why I love collaboration and connection and inclusion. It's because you just get to learn things you didn't know before. There's so much magic in like, wow, you know, like I didn't know that. And now I know this person.
Getting to meet that person as well as like the learning that you get to do. The fun thing I think about learning is that like you get to know something and then sometimes that makes a connection either like right away with something random that you know in some other aspect of life, or later down the road you're like, oh, you know, this actually reminds me of this random scenario that is I found super interesting or whatever. That's what I love about like TED Talks. There's some random idea that gets crystallized and later you're like, oh, actually, you know, this applies to this work situation I find myself in or whatever. It's fun to have that basis of knowledge and gain something new because you get to make those connections. At least for me personally, I love doing that. That's the fun part.
Yeah, I do. All right. So next we came together and defined our company core values, or at least updated our company core values that were already defined. We just had to update them and put a little more meat around them.
Yeah, so let's go one by one there. So let's start right up at the top. And this one, we kind of went back and forth on some of the prioritization here, but I think this one really speaks to the core of everything we want to do and deliver. And that is we support. It is really, we want to treat life a little bit more like it is. It is a team sport. It is Ubuntu. It is that connection. And we like to have that leading, the supporting. It's where you find the group that comes together that does something that has never been done before. And you find that coaching, you stop the unhelpful mental routines, you stop the obstacles, and it's incredibly fun to be a part of. And it's what we've worked into a lot of our work, both creating courses, creating our assessments, creating more the podcast itself. This really boils into what we want to do with all of this work.
Awesome. Our second one is we talk it out, which shouldn't be surprising at all, given that we have a podcast. But it's not just about talking and listening to the sound of our voices. Talking it out is because, you know, one of the concepts that we really like is we over communicate, and we aim to over communicate twice. So communication is one of those things that there's never enough of it. Silence is not golden. Silence is deadly. And so it really is about providing transparency and discussions and connecting and including everybody, all the necessary party. We're not in other people's brains. We don't do what they do. We don't see things the way they see them, and we don't have their skills. So we can't assume that a piece of information may not be important for them to know. They can make that choice. So share all information, and then people can discern, I need this, I don't need that. That's not quite important. This is top priority. But if we have, again, that collaboration and trust and inclusion, we can trust that we can provide all information to everybody, and then they make the decision on what's needed. The opposite creates void, and it creates stories that people create in their heads, because the human brain cannot handle not having data, which means not communicating, not creating transparency, then creates all the, oh my God, like Alex didn't reply to me because he hates me, or whatever possible stories could go through my head. But that's when the stories come on. And especially, you know, I've seen it countless of times when it comes to change management. There's always this big thing about like, we don't communicate until we have the solution already figured out and all perfect, and we know exactly what we're saying. And I'm like, no, we communicate that we're building it and we need their help from the beginning. And we communicate we're still working on it every other day, because otherwise the stories will be created by themselves. And it's way worse than just hearing we're working on it. And yes, we love your opinion. can you come to this meeting on this date?
It's classic, like getting ownership as well, because people do need that ownership, and they usually have something to say you don't know about. You're not like, it's like the puzzle pieces we were talking about early. You're not going to cover the full spread. You're not going to like, there will be gaps. Even when you do communicate, there'll be gaps, but you can at least close these. You can reach out. You can have people help you with the transition and help you with the change that you want to make, if you have that ability to talk it out and not try and just deliver, here's what we believe needs to be done, go do it.
Yeah. And when it comes to the workplace, the talking it out includes the hard conversations. It includes the sharing gratitude, the sharing appreciation. It includes the saying good morning. It includes the putting together the resources and the space to be able to do that. So one of the things that we do in teams is we use Slack and we create a team channel. And every morning, whenever somebody gets online, they say good morning. They don't have to say anything else if there's nothing else to say for the day. But at least we know, again, I exist. People exist. Wonderful. And usually the conversations happen throughout the day, but it's that there is communication. When something from a project changes and I am the one that the client communicates it to, I turn around and communicate to everybody else exactly how I heard it, saying, this is how I heard it. I might have missed things because I was alone in that meeting and I won't make that mistake again. But this is what I heard and this is my understanding of it. Now, you know exactly what I know. Nothing more, nothing less. What do we do about it? And that's where that Ubuntu comes in, that collaboration comes in, because now everybody can figure out like, oh, that's important to me and that's important to me. And oh, that's important to that person. But unless I do my job, they can't finish their part.
That's exactly it. And it does come down to like at the base of the human communication, like the good mornings, the good connections over even an IM client. Anything can still be a great like interaction. And in addition to that, it's the over communicating and communicating of who's going to be involved with different changes, making sure everybody has the information they need. Because it's not really, it's not fair to assume people will do a job without the information. For one, it won't work out particularly well, and there'll be, you're not playing with a full hand at that point. And it's hard to deliver a good product there or a good project. And it's definitely hard to get an actual connection with somebody, an actual relationship where you're going to find a real solution, rather than just saying, well, you said you needed a CRM. I built a CRM. I have no idea what you're going to use with it, but here it is. Exactly. So good luck.
Yes, here's your CRM.
And that kind of wraps us right into our third value of we learn, which you can tell from both of our personal values that comes directly from the curiosity and learning. That one is, especially in a space like this, our whole goal is to make a more human workplace, to have people allowed to show up as their more authentic selves, be able to do work that is interesting to them and connect and collaborate in more genuine and authentic ways. And that requires a ton of learning. And there's so much new research all the time to kind of keep up with that you want to be able to help with. There's so much to learn about people, about individuals. Everyone has their own experiences and something really incredible to contribute. But you have to be able to learn it. And you have to be curious about doing it. And you have to have done something many times and still the next time you come to it, say, what might be different this time? What's going to happen that is new? Or what should we do different? What do we want to do different from last time? And that's where learning comes up so much in the business space, especially for the work that we do.
Definitely. And the authenticity really around it is everybody learns differently. So understanding each other, so talking it out and supporting people. Help the learning, because now we can understand like, oh, this person learns by doing, not by hearing. So hearing the same concept repeated to them 15 times and then getting frustrated because they still can't do it, still not going to resolve it. If they can't do it themselves and touch the technology or go through the process or go through the steps, they're still not going to learn it, because that's their learning preference. That's their learning way.
That's exactly it. And you have to have that curiosity to find that and to talk with them about that, and then to find out how to best work with that. And that's a really great example.
Yeah. And the last one is we create space. So it's not last because it's the least important, but maybe it's because it's the most important. So none of the above can really happen. Well. Yes. None of the above can really happen if the space is not psychologically safe, which we've talked about in the past already. But it's, space needs to exist. one of the things that, one of the examples that comes to mind is that you use all the time, Alex, is the glass door policy, which is the non-psychological safe way of saying, my door is open, come to me all the time. And then the first time something happens, you smash your head against a glass door because it's not really open. It's only open if, it's the first question, or it's the right time of the day, or it's the right time of the project, or I don't know what the reasoning why the door is closed.
I just saw a LinkedIn post from actually an old coworker of ours, but it was sharing a story that was very much the epitome of the glass door. And it was this person who'd come in and was leading a team, and they said they talked about how important it is to be kind, to be connected, to help your teammates, and we were all thrilled to hear this. We were all working long hours at this point, and glad this was going to be a change. And I feel like it was going to be much more open now. I feel like there was going to be some collaboration. And then he capped off the speech with, but don't mistake my kindness for I don't know, being easy or something, or like I won't have a fight or something.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh God, what was it? It was something just like it was like 59 minutes of like building up the team, like connecting well, like establishing as a decent leader, all squandered in one last clause. One last like and I think kindness is important, but don't think that I'm I'm not going to let you get away with stuff. And so it was like just some kind of like, there'll still be a hammer or something. And that was definitely the message that came across. And I remember just openly laughing with a coworker in the back at that point. We're like, oh, all right. Okay. Well, that does feel like it negates what we just spent our hour on, but okay. All right.
And thank you for wasting my time for the last 59 minutes. You could
know this will be lip service only. Yes. It's important to see that was just a funny one about why space is important and why the glass door policy. I think people can probably relate to, like, come to me with any concerns, and the first concern comes up and they're like, oh my God, you're killing this project, why don't you keep it to yourself next time there's an issue? Okay, well, it's not really an open door policy. I've explained this 5 times.
Why do I have to explain it again? Yes.
And it's we purposely put these core values as actions. We put them as we support, we talk it out, we learn, we create space. We did this because it allows you to connect back with what you want to be doing. And we are making a decision, and we were making a decision as a company, like, how does this help us support? And sometimes that is even doing things like turning down projects, which sounds like it's, against doing the we support. We want to help people. And if people want the help, we want to run projects. It's wonderful, obviously, to keep filling that. If we don't have the availability or the, team available at the time to deliver that project, the most supportive thing we can do is let them know that. And that becomes, talking it out. That becomes transparency. That talks about, and that also relates to how, just like our personal values, all of these are connected and they bounce off of one another. But we found it important, and we found it useful to suggest core values as actions for that reason. It helps you orient your decisions, and it reminds you, and you have to remind yourself of what aspect of this you're doing. Even if it is doing things like turning down a project or saying, oh, we won't be able to do that right now. Taking care of yourself allows yourself to do things like support. There's times where it's just better to do the thing that seems, and that's why I have like 40 thoughts now happening. 40 thoughts started here. That's the other reason that the values that are just a list, I find difficult to do, because, if I just looked at our we support and then I had a base level of interpretation of that and didn't understand what we mean by it, it's easy to just think like, well, then I better turn myself into a martyr and run myself entirely out of energy, making sure I'm supporting people. But that's not a realistic way of doing it, nor is it actually supportive in the end. In the end, we want to be able to deliver the most support, the most help, and that requires slowing down sometimes. That requires stepping back. That requires having other conversations. That requires taking breaks, whatever needs to happen. And it's important to flesh those out. We like them as actions, and then also remember just the 360 view of each of these values.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Because the other thing we did is, besides make them action verbs, not words, we define them. So each one of these has a paragraph that says, this is what we mean by talking it out. We do mean having hard conversations. We create space means that we always hold the door open, not the glass door, the real door, for new perspectives and voices, by listening and understanding and serving. And so there's an actual, like, these are the actions we expect of each other. These are the actions that we expect from the people that work with us. And from a client perspective, we understand that they have different values, but they do have to be aligned. So working with a client who is not transparent, not a good fit. So yes, we want to help. And if it's not a good fit, we're not helping anyone.
Yeah. We can't help you as effectively. You won't get the help.
Yeah.
It's as easy as that.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that I guess we'll just plug ourselves out a little bit on this one. This is one thing we love to do as Siamo. We like to do core value assessments. They tend to be just one day events where we go in, we get to talk to a lot of the, generally the leadership that started with some of the core values. We kind of reassess, is this really where we want to be, as well as define paragraphs like these, because getting this definition together so that it is in the shared vocabulary and something that everybody can repeat a little bit more, and all the employees are a little bit easier to, it's a little easier for them to remember these things off the top of their head. That becomes important because it connects that engagement. Everybody can understand how we should be acting. It can also understand when we're a little bit out of that. And then it's easier to create the space to call people on it and know this is where we're guided. This is how we want this to show up. This is how we want this to be used and utilized. And so that's something that we found creates a lot of alignment and engagement. And it's also just incredibly fun to do, as you can tell by the fact that we've mentioned values 40,000 times over the last year in this podcast.
They're not going away.
And we get to be curious, and we get to learn, and we get to talk it out. It's great. We get our values right up front.
Yes,
so
yes.
We love doing core value assessments. That's always been a fun, it's always fun days.
Yes, it is. Well, thank you for listening to this, and hope that this inspires you to at least look into many of the different ways to find your values or start thinking about them. And definitely get in touch if you would like us to guide you through them.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Good luck on your own values journeys.
Yes, thank you.